I still remember the exact moment my heart slowed, not from age but from shock. I had just returned home, my bag still resting against my shoulder when I noticed the gate was already open. That felt strange. I always closed it myself. Always. Small habits become anchors when life feels heavy. The air felt different that evening, not colder, just unfamiliar. I stepped inside and saw my things first, not neatly packed, not respectfully stored. They were stacked near the wall like forgotten luggage. My shawl, my old handbag, a box of letters tied with faded ribbon, things that carried decades, not dust. I didn't cry, I simply stood there. Inside the house, voices floated out, soft laughter, clinking cups, comfort that no longer included me. I walked forward slowly, my shoes echoing on the floor I had paid for years ago with tired hands and sleepless nights. That's when I saw her. My daughter-in-law Myra stood near the sofa, arms folded, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're back already," she said. "We thought it would take longer." I asked quietly, "Why are my things outside?" She glanced at the pile and shrugged. "We needed space. Things are changing." Changing, that word stayed with me. She led me past the living room, past the family photos I framed, past the curtains I chose, toward a small room behind the kitchen. No windows to the street. Just a single chair, a narrow bed, and a bulb that flickered like it wasn't sure it belonged there. "You can stay here," she said. "It's temporary." Temporary always means permanent when no one plans to move you back. My son Armin wasn't home yet, or maybe he was avoiding me. I didn't ask. I didn't raise my voice. I only nodded and placed my bag down gently, as if this space deserved care even if I didn't. That night, I sat on the bed and looked at my hands. Hands that cooked, cleaned, paid bills, held this family together when things fell apart. They were steady, still capable. I wasn't crying, I was thinking, and thinking can be dangerous when someone assumes you've grown weak. I reached into my bag and took out my notebook. Old habit, dates, notes. Small reminders of what belongs to whom. Because homes are built with love, but ownership is written in truth. They believed giving me a smaller room would make me smaller too. They didn't know this was the moment I started remembering everything. That small room had a sound of its own, not noise, absence. I could hear the refrigerator hum through the wall, footsteps above me, laughter that stopped when I entered shared spaces. The house was alive, just not for me anymore. I sat on the narrow bed, smoothing the fabric with my palm, grounding myself in the present. I wasn't crying. I was listening, listening to the way people talk differently when they think you no longer matter. Later that evening, my son finally came home. Rayan. I heard his keys before I saw his face. He stood at the doorway of the small room, not fully stepping inside, as if crossing that line would make things real. "Mom," he said softly. "It's just for a while." "For how long?" I asked. He avoided my eyes. That answer told me more than words ever could. I asked him one simple question. "Who decided this?" Silence again. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay there remembering years instead. How this house began as an empty structure, how my late husband and I painted the walls ourselves, how I signed papers trusting family over formality. Trust doesn't leave a paper trail. But responsibility does. At dawn, I opened my notebook again. Dates, transfers, repairs I paid for, bills in my name long after others claimed control. I didn't rush. I never rush important things. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet on purpose. Silence can make people careless. They spoke freely around me, assuming I didn't understand, assuming age had softened my awareness. It hadn't. I heard conversations about money, about ownership, about what I no longer needed. I noted every word mentally, calmly, the way one memorizes directions when planning a journey. On the fourth day, I visited an old friend, not for comfort, for clarity. Mr. Halim, a legal advisor I hadn't spoken to in years. He listened without interrupting, flipping through the documents I brought. His eyebrows lifted slightly, then stayed there. "This house," he said slowly, "was never transferred." I felt something settle inside me, not relief, certainty. "The signatures don't exist," he continued, "and the authority they're claiming, it's assumed. Not legal." Assumed power can feel very real until truth walks in quietly and takes its seat. I thanked him and left without drama, no confrontations, no announcements. Back in that small room, I packed my notebook carefully. Because when someone tries to erase your place, the most powerful thing you can do is remember every detail they forgot. They thought my silence meant surrender. What they didn't know was that silence was giving me time, and time was on my side. By the time the sun rose on the fifth morning, fear no longer lived in me. Clarity had taken its place. I sat at the small table in my room, papers spread neatly in front of me, not angrily, not desperately, just carefully. There's a difference between reacting and preparing, and I had done enough reacting in my lifetime. I wasn't crying. I was calculating every bill I had paid, every repair receipt, every record with my name still printed clearly at the top. Ownership isn't about who speaks loudest. It's about who holds the truth. That afternoon, I walked through the house slowly, not to confront anyone, to observe. Myra was on the phone, laughing softly, talking about plans that didn't include me. My son avoided my gaze again. Avoidance, I learned, is its own confession. Later at dinner, Myra finally spoke. "We should talk about the future," she said casually, passing a plate like this was just another family discussion. I looked up calmly. "Yes," I replied, "we should." The table went quiet. "I'll be visiting my advisor tomorrow," I continued, "to review the house documents." Myra's hand paused midair just for a second, enough for me to notice. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly. "We've handled everything." I met her eyes. Handled doesn't mean finalized. No one argued, no one corrected me. That night I slept deeply for the first time since returning. Confidence has a way of softening the body. The next morning I met Mr. Halim again. This time we moved from observation to action. Notices were prepared, accounts reviewed, boundaries written clearly in ink, not emotion. "You don't need to fight," he told me. "The law already speaks for you." On the way home, I felt lighter, not because I was winning, but because I was standing where I belonged again. When I returned, Myra was waiting. "You're making things complicated," she said. "No," I answered gently. "I'm making things clear." She didn't respond. And for the first time, the house felt smaller to them, not to me. Fear fades when truth enters the room. And once it does, there's no pretending nothing has changed. The invitation came that evening, dressed as kindness. "Let's all sit together," Myra said. "Clear the air." Clear the air usually means rewriting the story while expecting silence in return. The dining table looked the same as always, polished and familiar, yet something about it felt different. Maybe because for the first time I wasn't sitting there out of habit. I was sitting there with intention. Myra's parents were present that night. Well-dressed, confident, The kind of people who speak as if decisions have already been approved somewhere important. They talked about space, about comfort, about what was practical at this stage of life. I listened, I nodded politely. I let them finish. I wasn't crying, I was waiting. Finally, Myra's mother leaned forward and said, "We were thinking perhaps it's time you considered something smaller, less responsibility." I placed my spoon down slowly. "This house," I said evenly, "is already small enough when respect is missing." The room stiffened. Rayan shifted in his chair. Myra crossed her arms. No one interrupted me. "I built stability here," I continued, "not noise. Not control, stability, and stability doesn't expire with age." Myra laughed softly. "You're being emotional." "No," I replied calmly, "I'm being factual." I reached into my bag and placed copies of documents on the table. "Not dramatically, just one by one. The house remains legally mine," I said. "No transfer, no authority granted, and any financial changes made without consent will be reviewed." Silence spread quickly. "Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind." Myra's father cleared his throat. "That doesn't sound accurate." "It is," I said. "Verified." Rayan finally looked at me, really looked at me. Not as someone to manage, but as someone standing her ground. "I'm not here to argue," I added. "I'm here to correct the direction this conversation was going." Myra stood abruptly. "You're embarrassing us." I stayed seated. Truth often feels that way when it arrives uninvited. That night ended early. No raised voices. No apologies either, but something important shifted. People become careful when they realize you're no longer confused. I returned to my small room not because I had to, but because I chose to. There's power in choosing where you stand, even temporarily. I lay down calmly, hands folded, mind steady. They had planned my future without me. Now they knew they couldn't. That dinner wasn't the end of the conflict, it was the moment they understood I wasn't stepping aside anymore. The days that followed were different, not loud, not dramatic, just careful. The house felt tense in a way I had never known before. Conversations lowered when I entered a room. Phones were taken outside, doors closed gently but deliberately. People do that when they realize control is slipping but don't know where it went. I wasn't crying, I was observing. Myra stopped giving instructions. Instead, she asked questions, not kindly, not openly, but carefully, like someone testing ice before stepping forward. "Are you really going through with this?" she asked one morning, pretending to tidy the counter. "I already have," I replied calmly. That afternoon, legal notices were delivered, not accusations, clarifications about finances. About authority, about boundaries that should never have been crossed in the first place. Rayan read them in silence. I watched his shoulders drop slightly as if a weight he didn't know how to carry had finally been placed down. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. "It went far the moment I was moved out of my own space," I answered. There was no anger in my voice, just truth. The agreement was simple, transparent, fair, rent would be paid. Accounts corrected, decisions discussed, not assumed, respect restored or consequences followed. Myra didn't speak during the meeting. She stared at the table, jaw tight. Control doesn't leave loudly, it resists quietly. By evening, the small room no longer felt temporary. It felt symbolic, a reminder of where this all began and how quickly it changed once clarity stepped in. I packed my things slowly, not to leave but to move back. The main bedroom still smelled like familiarity, like life lived fully. I opened the window and let fresh air in. That night I slept deeply again, not because everything was fixed, but because I had taken my place back. The house wasn't mine because of walls or paperwork. It was mine because I refused to disappear from my own story, and from that day forward they spoke to me differently, not louder, more carefully. The moment they stopped telling me what would happen was the moment they realized I was the one deciding what came next. I thought I was stronger than stress. Years of endurance can convince you of that. But one morning, as I stood by the window holding my tea, my chest tightened, not sharply, just enough to make me pause. I sat down slowly, listening to my breathing, telling myself it was nothing. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking, I was negotiating with my own body. By evening, I was in a hospital bed. Machines spoke in soft beeps. The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "You've been under prolonged stress," he said. "Your heart needs rest." Real rest? Rest. It sounded simple, it wasn't. Rayan came that night. He sat quietly beside me, hands folded, eyes tired. He didn't speak much. Sometimes silence carries more weight than apologies. Others came too. Family members who had heard pieces of the story, enough to understand without explanation. They stayed, they listened, they didn't rush me. Myra did not come, I didn't ask why. Absence explains itself. The doctor returned the next morning. "You need to remove the source of stress," he said gently. "Otherwise, this will happen again." I nodded. I already knew. When I was discharged, I didn't go back to the house immediately. I stayed with my younger sister for a while. Quiet mornings, short walks, simple meals. My body slowly remembered what calm felt like. During that time, I made decisions I had postponed for years. I revised my will, updated authorities, defined boundaries clearly on paper and in practice. Strength isn't stubbornness. Sometimes it's knowing when to change the shape of your life to protect it. When I finally returned to the house, it felt different, not hostile, just distant. Like a place that once held meaning but no longer held peace. I collected what mattered: photos, letters, small objects that carried memory, not tension. Rayan stood in the doorway again. This time he didn't block it. "I didn't know how to fix things," he admitted. "I wasn't asking you to fix them," I said softly. "I was asking you to see them." He nodded. I left without bitterness, without drama. Because choosing your health over familiarity is not weakness, it's wisdom. That hospital room didn't scare me. What scared me was realizing how much I had almost sacrificed just to keep others comfortable. I was settling into my new routine when the call came. Not urgent, not emotional, just unexpected. It was Myra's mother. Her voice sounded different this time, measured, stripped of confidence. She asked if we could meet. "Just to talk," she said. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in the late afternoon, the kind of place where conversations stay low and faces stay neutral. She arrived early, documents already laid out on the table, fingers tapping nervously on the edges. "I didn't know everything," she said before I even sat down. I listened. She explained what had slowly unraveled at their end: financial discrepancies, stories that didn't align, promises made without proof. The image Myra had carefully built was cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. "There are debts," her mother admitted, "more than we were told, and some things were exaggerated." Exaggerated is a polite word for deception. I nodded calmly, sipping my tea. I wasn't crying, I wasn't angry. I had already moved past shock. This was confirmation, not revelation. She slid one document toward me. "I think you should see this." I scanned it slowly. The numbers told their own story, plans made on assumptions. Futures constructed on borrowed ground. I'm sorry, she said finally, for how we spoke to you, for how we assumed. I understand, I replied, and I did. Control often disguises itself as concern. When I returned home that evening, Rayan was waiting. He looked exhausted, like someone who had spent weeks holding a truth he didn't want to name. I know now, he said quietly. I didn't ask what he meant. He sat across from me, hands clasped, voice low. I should have listened earlier. Yes, I said gently, you should have. There was no satisfaction in being right, only clarity in being done. That night I slept peacefully. Not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was hidden anymore. Truth doesn't shout when it arrives. It simply stands there, undeniable, waiting for everyone else to catch up. I thought the hardest part was losing my place in that house, but it turned out the hardest part for them was losing the lie they built around it. My new place is smaller, quieter. It doesn't echo with expectations or unspoken rules. Morning light reaches the window gently, not urgently. I make my tea without checking who's watching. I sit where I want, I breathe how I want. Peace, I learned, doesn't need much space, it needs permission. I wasn't crying. I was settling. People assume starting over is loud, that it requires announcements, dramatic exits, slammed doors. Mine didn't. Mine happened quietly, one decision at a time, like folding away a life that no longer fit. Rayan visits sometimes. He calls before coming now. He listens more than he speaks. Regret has softened him, but I no longer wait for it to turn into change. I accept people where they are, or I leave them where they stand. Myra and I do not speak. That silence doesn't hurt anymore. What surprised me most wasn't the loss of a home, it was the return of myself. The woman who trusted her instincts. The woman who remembered details. The woman who didn't confuse patience with permission. I walk in the evenings, slowly, not to think, just to feel my feet on the ground, to remind myself that I am still here, still capable, still whole. Sometimes I open my notebook. The same one that started everything. I don't write in it much now, it served its purpose. But I keep it close as a reminder. Awareness is power, and power doesn't always look like control. It often looks like choice. I chose peace over familiarity, health over history, truth over comfort. And no, my story didn't end with applause or apologies. It ended with something better: clarity. Because when you stop shrinking to keep others comfortable, the world doesn't collapse, it simply rearranges. And you finally see how much room you actually need. They thought this story was about a house. It never was. It was about what happens when a woman decides she will no longer disappear quietly. Time has a way of settling things, not by fixing them, but by revealing what truly matters. Weeks passed, then months. Life slowed into a rhythm that felt natural, not forced. I wasn't crying, I was reflecting. From a distance, I could finally see the house for what it had become to me, not a loss, not a battlefield, but a chapter that ended exactly when it needed to. Sometimes, holding on too long teaches others that you will accept anything. Letting go teaches them you will not. Rayan called more often, not to ask for help, not to complain, just to talk about work, about ordinary things. He no longer spoke as if I were a problem to be managed. He spoke as if I were a person again. One afternoon he asked, "Do you regret it?" I took my time answering. "No," I said. "I regret waiting so long to listen to myself." There was silence on the line, not uncomfortable, thoughtful. I learned something important during that time. Family doesn't always mean proximity. Sometimes it means boundaries. Sometimes it means choosing love without surrendering your dignity. I filled my days with simple routines, morning walks, reading, tending to small plants on the balcony. Each leaf felt like proof that care, when given freely, grows without resistance. People who hear my story often expect bitterness at the end, anger, resentment, but those emotions require energy I no longer wish to give away. What I feel instead is steadiness. I survived not because I fought loudly, but because I refused to erase myself quietly. And that lesson stays with you, everywhere. I thought reclaiming my space was the victory, but the real victory was reclaiming my voice and knowing I would never lose it again. People often think endings arrive with noise. They don't. Mine arrived quietly on a morning when I woke up without heaviness in my chest. No plans, no pressure, just calm. I sat near the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup, watching the day begin without asking anything from me. I wasn't crying, I was complete. This story never became about winning or losing, it became about choosing. Choosing when to speak, choosing when to step back, choosing not to trade dignity for comfort ever again. I learned that love without respect slowly turns into a burden. And that silence, when used wisely, can protect you better than arguments ever could. I don't blame anyone anymore. Blame keeps you tied to the past. Understanding lets you walk forward. Rayan and I speak now with honesty. Not often, not deeply, but respectfully. That's enough. I no longer try to fill gaps that aren't mine to fill. Everyone must carry their own choices. My days are simple now, peaceful. I read, I walk. I sit with my thoughts and don't rush them away. I allow sadness to pass through me without letting it stay. That's something age teaches you. Feelings don't need permission, but they don't need ownership either. If you're listening to this and wondering if it's too late to reclaim your place, let me tell you something gently. It's not too late to speak, not too late to set boundaries, not too late to choose yourself. You don't need to become louder, you don't need to become harder, you just need to stop disappearing. This wasn't a story about a house, it was a story about remembering worth. And if my journey resonated with you, if you saw yourself somewhere between these lines, then this story did what it was meant to do. Thank you for sitting with me. Thank you for listening. Before you go, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment your thoughts below. I read them and your voice matters here. Thank you for watching.